Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. I'm here with Jack to go over the Time Gazer and Space Juggler scans for our first impressions. These are going to make up our Astral Radiance set in about 6 weeks' time. So it's going to be actually quite an important set because it will be the set for NAIC. And is obviously going to be part of our world's sort of block of sets as well. So yeah, definitely some big tournaments that are going to happen here, as well as a couple of regionals. So definitely good to touch base on these cards alongside the Battle Region set. That is what's going to make up the latest. So Jack is here with me as well. But before we jump into it, we'll start with the trainers as always. But we do have to talk about the lovely Potown store. Make sure you go ahead and check them out. Use code OmniPoke for 5% discount on your order for PTCGO codes. And now we're back. So Jack, do you want to kick us off with the first trainer on the list?
Yeah, so as always, we're going to kick things off with trainers just because it gives us an idea of kind of universal cards that can go into every deck. First things first is Switch Card. It's an item that says switch your active basic Pokemon with one of your bench Pokemon. If you do, heal 30 damage from the Pokemon you move to your bench. So it's a strict upgrade to Switch in basic only decks. Typically, because we're still in like a VMAX format, we're going to a V-Star format, and in general, these are the cards they're trying to push. There aren't that many purely basic decks right now, so there aren't many decks that definitely see this as a strict upgrade. There's not too much to say about the card other than in all basic decks, this is a strict upgrade to Switch. We'll have to see whether the meta evolves into somewhere where some of these decks can exist. But right now, with Inteleon engines and Sinnoh engines and you know, all of these different sort of V stars and V maxes that are being played, it's kind of hard to see where this goes in current format. But yeah, it's a good one to have and one to keep in mind for your basic decks going forward.
Yeah, I think the only card that I could think about like right now in standard is like Entei, because you damage yourself with Basin sometimes. So maybe something there immediately, but outside of that, not too much immediate application. Then we have Trekking Shoes, one of the most interesting trainers for sure. It allows you to look at the top card of your deck, then you can put it into the hand, or you can discard it and draw a different card off the top of your deck. So really cool. It's similar to Acrobike in a lot of ways because it's a dig 2 if you need to, if you're looking for specific outs. And trainer-based draw is typically like really good in the TCG. If you're happy with the draw, obviously that's great. You don't have to discard anything, which is also nice as well. A bit of a hindrance with Acrobike is if you get two good targets and you're forced to throw away a resource that you don't want to. So at worst, it's an upgrade to Judge Whistle, I guess, just for that free one card. And you have the option to have discard in there as well. This can be helpful for, synergies. As you know, getting things like energy in the discard pile can be beneficial. Getting rid of like excess early game, like supporters or anything like that is worth getting rid of as well. So really nice to have some discard synergy. There might be some types specifically that will be looking for a card like this. The current archetypes we have in format probably don't like a card like this. But there are things like Dark Patch coming in the newest set, so some Dark archetypes might like this. There's maybe some Metal Saucer shenanigans going on with like the Dialga deck and could need some help with consistency. So this could be a decent card. I think that's really where we're going to see it. It seems to be more of a card for the future, as there's mostly not many things that would want to play it. I think me and Jack both had the discussion about Mew, whether or not it would actually play this card. I'm on the sort of no camp of things, because typically drawing cards isn't the problem of Mew, even though this is like a free extra card. You can like front load that card with the Genesect anyway, so you're not actually like thinning that much, and there really aren't that many cards you want to thin with Mew. Normally you are discarding via your quick balls and ultra balls. It's like maybe if you see a VIP pass in your top deck, that's a great discard. Like other than that, I'm not sure what else you want to bin. So yeah, it's an interesting one. It could find its way into Mew as like a 1 or 2 counts because it's obviously solid. And we currently have that sort of like switching cup space, I guess you could say, for the deck, which is like probably on the worst end of cards you could be playing, but is just about making it right now. And is, yeah, certainly interesting for things wanting discard synergy going ahead.
Yeah. Next up, we have Unidentified Fossil. This is actually in both sets because there's a new Bastiodon and Cranidos or Bastiodon and Rampardos in both sets. Unidentified Fossil is basically unchanged from its previous iterations. It's a 60 HP item card, essentially, that you play as if it were a 60 HP basic Pokemon of the colorless type. And then anytime during your turn, you can just discard it from play. Can't retreat. So yeah, essentially this is a rehash of the fossil mechanic that we had in the Sun and Moon era that was never particularly strong. It saw some niche play here and there. Essentially, the biggest time it saw play though was when we had a stadium that let you immediately get fossil Pokemon onto the board. So you kind of used an unidentified fossil here and there to supplement that, but typically it was the stadium that made the fossil deck at least sort of playable. So it's kind of hard to see this working. Both the Cranidos and the both the Bastiodon and the Rampardos aren't particularly special either, given the fact that they're essentially stage twos with downside because you have to play the fossil rather than just being able to play the basics. So yeah, unfortunately, it turns out it's not really worth all of the hassle. If you are looking to play this deck, it probably has to be built around like a Mew engine, just because you need to be able to find these fossils a bit more consistently than just drawing into them. So yeah, I think that's going to be the only way to really play it. I don't think it's going to be worth it, unfortunately, until we see some better ways of getting the fossil Pokemon out or better fossils in general. But yeah, it's essentially the same mechanic as before.
Yeah. Next up, we have a new ball search card. We have Featherball. It allows you to search your deck for a Pokemon with 0 retreat, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Now, there's basically like no targets for this in the game. I think there's Mew V and V Max, and there's also Jolteon V and V Max. I think Jolteon would actually probably play like 1 or 2 copies of this, and is a pretty nice upgrade actually, because you're always panicking about having sometimes multiple Jolteon turn 1, especially if you're going second, so you don't just get like boss KO'd and lose the game. So I think that's actually interesting for Jolteon. I don't think it's good enough for Mew. Your ball search is already like 2 premium. So at the moment, those are basically the only targets we can see, but this is just a great card to have in the card pool that rewards free retreat, which is already like really good. So a nice card to see for sure.
Cool cue card as well.
Yeah,
I think like all of these.
I forgot we're talking about other sets. We're talking more than standard here, and yeah.
But yeah, there's a couple of really cool cube cards coming up.
Agreed.
The first supporter we're going to talk about is Adaman. Adaman says discard 2 metal from hand. If you do, search your deck for up to 2 cards, put them into your hand. So obviously, natural metal synergy. We're going to talk about a Dialga later on that is essentially kind of one of the poster cards of the set. Adaman is great. Being able to search for any 2 cards is very, very strong. We've seen that that kind of effect is very powerful. And being able to do it on a supporter, which means you can do it on multiple turns, is obviously great. Having to discard 2 metal energy is a bit of a downside. Actually, discarding metal energy can be typically seen as an upside, because we have Metal Saucer that's going to be one of the primary ways of trying to accelerate metal energy. But in general, I think the conditions of this are going to make it a little bit too hard to be like the main engine of a deck. I could see this being maybe like one of in some metal decks, just because the effect is very strong, and we have cards like Luminion now that mean we can play these niche one-offs here and there. But I think it's going to be too difficult to be able to always fulfill this condition, to be able to make a deck built around this as the main draw supporter, or main sort of engine, just because we have a lot of ways of discarding metal energy already. We have already great supporters in the format. So it's a tough one. It's got some tough competition. But yeah, I can maybe see it as a splashed one-of in some metal decks. I think, obviously, the metal decks that maybe are looking to build around the new Magnezone that we'll talk about, that need like candy engines, it might mean that they have to play something like this. But yeah, I don't think it's strong enough to be a main engine. But I think a niche one-off here and there could smooth out certain turns if you find yourself with extra metals that can then end up being attached via Sorcerer or whatever anyway.
Yeah, this is actually a throwback to the Crash Awake supporter we had in Water. Basically the exact same card, and that only really did well in a deck that played like 35 energies to reliably use the supporter. So yeah, unreliable, so like kind of a one-of at most. Then we have a super exciting one. We have Gardenias Vitality. It allows you to draw 2, then attach up to 2 grass energy from hand to one of your benched Pokemon. So a few stipulations here that does differentiate it from Welder, but it's energy acceleration in a supporter that also offers card draw, and that is obviously going to scream Welder straight away. It's 2 energy as well, so a big upgrade to the likes of like Melanie that we have in format. It is from hand, but the good news is you get to draw 2 first. So even though you're drawing 1 less than, say, a Welder or a Melanie, you do always get to use the effect of Gardenia's Vitality. There were some awful times with Welder where it just wasn't a usable card in hand because things didn't line up correctly. But sometimes you can use the Gardenias just for the draw 2, which feels bad, but you can do it and then sometimes high roll into like a Grass Energy off the top of your deck and at least get some acceleration. So that's pretty reasonable, actually. Going to the bench is annoying because it means you're going to fill your deck with like a good number of basic energy, but also need a good number of like switching cards or free retreaters naturally in your deck. So it will start eating into your spaces that little bit, but Grass seems like a good type to be, actually, for once in the game. Not just because of this card, but also you're hitting a pretty relevant weakness now with the likes of Darkrai and Hisuian Samurott coming out in the same set as these. So it's a good time to have some Grass support. And I think there's like a Lilligant that we'll look at later, which is potentially pretty interesting with this. So yeah, interesting card. Grass is getting like slightly better going ahead. I think just my knee-jerk is that I think this is kind of like weaker than Welder just because Welder had so much support. Like it had Giant Hearth and Flint as well and Fire Crystal, so it had such an abundance. Like you were never like out of fire energy. Whereas right now I feel like we might need a little bit of extra help with the Gardenia's Vitality. There's a couple of things we've been discussing early on about this to try and synergize and make sure that we have energy in our hand. There's obviously things like Training Courts. There's even an Eldegoss in one of our recent sets that can guarantee energy to hand. So there are some things that we can do here to try and make sure that this is live. But yeah, at the end of the day, great acceleration, and the little bit of draw is a shame, but we actually have great engine Pokemon in the game, so we might be able to get away with it just because ramp is just so crazy.
I think the other thing worth noting as well is typically fire Pokemon are way more aggressive than grass-type Pokemon, so the payoff of this card is less likely to be as oppressive as Welder, because grass Pokemon are often focused on healing or state conditions or whatever, whereas one of Fire's kind of big things is just big damage, discarding energy or whatever. Yeah. So I think this will feel a lot less oppressive than Welder, not just for the obvious reasons of one less card and it having to be to the bench, but because typically what we're attaching to isn't as scary, which is good.
Yeah. And we should just say it's not just for grass Pokemon. It is still universal acceleration, so it's similar to like Melanie, where you can bung it onto anything if you want it to. This doesn't even have V stipulation either, so maybe some one prizes.
Yeah. Next up we have Zisu. Zisu says draw cards until you have one more card in your hand than your opponent has in theirs. It's a strict upgrade on Battle Reporter that saw no play, and despite being a strict upgrade, pretty sure this won't see much play either. Right now, again, we still have way better supporters. Discard draw 7 is way less conditional than your opponent having a large hand, so typically, whilst we still have a raw draw 7, something like this isn't going to be the mainstay in many decks. It could be a random sort of supporter here or there. We've seen that these Inteleon engines play a plethora of different supporters for different reasons, but one that is dependent on your opponent's hand size is a little bit weak, so yeah, an upgrade, but still not good enough, unfortunately.
And then we have Gapejaw Bog, a pretty interesting stadium that we have seen text similar to in the past and has been very playable. This is very similar to Team Magma's Secret Base, I think it was. Whenever either players plays a basic from their hand onto their bench, place 2 counters onto that Pokemon. So you can use this to disrupt the opponent and put some preliminary damage on things, maybe to set them up. So straight away I'm thinking of the likes of Jolteon or Dragapult potentially as well. Anything that is trying to look to use like quick shooting throughout a game, this could be pretty interesting, where you're setting up some counters here and there and putting things in range, especially like one prize engine type Pokemon. This could be really dangerous, which I think is pretty cool. But also there are some like damage lovers in the set as well, where you can deal more damage the more you have. I think it's a Bishop, right? So it's the more damaged Pawniards are, the more you're dealing with the Bishop. So that's a throwback to a Gyarados deck that was like beloved and was pretty good as well. And there's even more damage potential with this exact Bishop that we'll look at later. So definitely a good one to bear in mind as we talk about some certain archetypes. Now we're going to jump to the other side of the set and those item and trainer cards, because we want the full context really before talking about the Pokemon. So we will skip all the way down, and if you want to start us off with the beautiful reprint, Jack, that everyone's super excited about.
I remember watching this stream live and waiting 45 minutes to see VS Seeker or Trader's Mail, and we got Energy Lotto, which actually, obviously in the comparison to VS Seeker and Trainer's Mail and Puzzle of Time and all of these random things that were predicted. Felt underwhelming, understandably, but I actually think it's a pretty interesting one to pick up. We actually have we have E-Search, but we don't have any this is another energy searching card, which is pretty cool. You look at the top 7 cards of your deck, find an energy card, and put it into your hand. What would play this? It's hard to say. It's typically in things like Intelligent Engines. A lot of the time, it's these decks are playing things like E-Search, so it's not really better than an E-Search because E-Search is guaranteed. This can pick up things like Double Turbo in Arceus builds, so maybe that could be a potential include to try and get an extra card, quote unquote, from your Starbirth rather than having to guarantee find a Double Turbo or whatever. Mew is another one that could play it. It's an insta-play, so it's never clogged in the hand because you can just fail the search. But also, it's a way of being able to, early game, find a Fusion Energy before you Sparkle without having to like dig and risk drawing too many more. You can just dig without really digging and then Sparkle, which could be pretty cool, as well as just finding more energy, which is basically really important in certain situations because you're jumping in so often and that kind of thing. So yeah, it was kind of underwhelming, but I think there could be a couple of decks that actually do end up including it here and there. I don't think it will be overwhelmingly good, but I think there are a couple of archetypes that might try it out, and it naturally synergizes with a couple of the decks in the game right now.
Yeah, true enough. So let's jump down to Hisuian Heavy Ball, which allows you to look at your face down prizes. You reveal a basic you find there and put it into your hand, then shuffle the Hisuian Heavy Ball into your remaining prize cards and put them back face down. So this is interesting. We always love some prize interaction. The fact that this is so limited to just basic Pokemon is slightly disappointing. But maybe if you play like enough tech one-ofs, like maybe you end up going like one Eldegoss, one Luminion, one Crobat, and then have cards like one Manaphy, like one Dunsparce, one Zigzagoon, stuff like this, and you just like play an amount of one-ofs that it finally becomes a tipping point to be worthwhile playing. We've actually seen recently like 22 one-offs in a regional winning deck and Peonia like coming in. So maybe it allows us to cut some corners with deck building and get away with it with the Heavy Ball. Because it's only basic Pokemon, it's still a little bit limited. But while we still have things like Scoop Up Net, I do really like just playing one of like coming into play ability style Pokemon. I think that could be really useful. And there's even some big cards, some of the Shining cards, right? The Genesect, the Horlucha. These are massive one-offs that sometimes you like not necessarily like build your deck around, but they can be huge power spikes if you can get them early, or if you can just access them from prizes. This can, things like Horlucha is the difference between missing and hitting a KO sometimes for certain math modifiers. So this could actually be a reasonable card. I think it's never like more than a one-of in your deck, but it gives you some great redundancy to cut some corners here and there. So I think just for the amount of good ability-based like basics, it can sometimes squeak in there, and it's going to be nice to remove things like Peonia from your deck at least.
Yeah. Next up, we have Super Effective Glasses. This is a really funny one. It's a tool. It says, when the Pokemon this card is attached to does damage to your opponent's active Pokemon, and that damage is affected by weakness, the weakness becomes ×3 instead. So, obviously, without a doubt, this is a bit of a meme card. But there definitely is some great, at least content potential, but even like some interesting interactions with this card. It's already been kind of theorized on Twitter that a Ludicolo style deck where you just play a 1-for-10 attacker of every single type of a colorless energy cost. You can play one-ofs of each of them because you get to play Hisuian Heavy Ball to find the specific ones if you want to save some space. You're doing 1-for-10, you boost the damage with Ludicolo up to 110, and then pop some glasses on, and you're doing 330 damage to whatever you want. A bit of a meme, of course, but I think it's actually a really, really creative meme. More likely is a more honed-in type deck that only picks like 3 or 4 types rather than trying to do the full sort of rainbow. Maybe finding some like 2-for-80 style attackers and being able to push 80 into like 240, maybe even 100 up to 300, that kind of thing. I think that's going to be more consistent than trying to like chain Ludicolos, but that sounds fun. In general, I think there's too many things going on that will mean the deck doesn't really work. But I think there's a lot of creativity that can be built out of this card. It kind of reminds me of the gloves, but the gloves were really limited in what they actually did, whereas it feels like the scope of this card is actually quite wide. Um, there's a lot of attackers that obviously were bulk before that you can actually reconsider now. Me and Joe looked at Carnivine earlier on that like does like 2 for 20 or something and draws cards, but in the Ludicolo deck it's actually really strong because early game it's drawing you into your combo, and then late game you're doing like 360 for 2 energy, which is obviously a bit stupid but pretty funny. So yeah, I don't think the card's going to be like meta competitive, but I think it's going to be one great for content creators because there's so many combos you can do with this. Two, like it might even be on the fringes of playable if you pick the right types and have a fairly decent engine. Kind of reminds me of like a Suicune Ludicolo engine with like slight differences. You probably have to up your Ludicolo line and thin down your Inteleon line a little bit here and there. But you can play like completely non-EX or one prizes, and you probably gain a little bit of space here and there. Yeah, it feels fun. I don't think it's going to be like game breakingly good, but it definitely feels like an exciting one to try out. And I think there will be a lot of highlight reel moments. We say this about a lot of cards, but I really do think this is a highlight reel card for sure.
Yeah, it seems like that. And also there's like potential for Zorobox, like just Zoroark itself is a potential bomb essentially. So this really is like opening up, similar to how Choice Belt opened up a few new attackers. This could do something similar. And possibly the all-star of the Ludicolo Glasses deck is this Iirido supporter, allowing you to search your deck for a water Pokemon and item and put them straight into your hand. So that's obviously great for the meme we were just talking about. But in general, this seems like a pretty solid card. Water Pokemon are very good right now. As we know, the Inteleon engine is very strong. Ludicolo is a card. We have Lumineon V, which is excellent as well. We have Artillery. There's like a ton of good water Pokemon. So even if you're not attacking with water, there's still some upside to playing Iirido in your deck because it can grab an item similar to like a Skylar, but also getting some of your like engine pieces rolling, which I think is also like really good value. So I could foresee this card seeing like a good amount of play, and also obviously there are some good water types in this set, and it's the Palkia V Star that we'll touch on later. Although we're mostly seeing Melanie in these water-based decks, Palkia does offer a bit of leeway with its V-Star power, accelerating energies. So you can play some like non-accelerating style supporters in your deck now pretty comfortably. And this certainly isn't a bad one to just get set up. So yeah, I can see this being, early game it feels like a fan club basically, because you can just grab like 2 water Pokemon if you grab a ball search item, like a quick ball. And then mid-game, it just has so many more options to turn into everything else. What I will say about Iirido, though, is we already have like a great amount of item tutoring. It may just be like redundant because we already have Inteleon, and Inteleon might just go into a lot of these engines regardless, and you just have like enough tutoring from Shady Dealings that you don't need this effect like in addition to all of that as well. So it could fall victim to the fact that Shady Dealings already does the job that Iirido does for the most part.
Yeah. Next up, we have Grant, and this is a really, really interesting card. So the first line of text is pretty simple. During this turn, your fighting Pokemon's attacks do 30 more damage to the active Pokemon. So it's a Leon, but just for fighting Pokemon, nothing really too exciting. But the following text is, it poses a lot of questions. So during this turn, let me emphasize this. If you discard 2 cards from your hand, excluding any Grant, you may take this Grant from your discard pile, reveal it, and put it into your hand. So, there's a couple of things this could mean. This could mean, and it kind of depends on when we see this card in tournament gameplay in Japan, and similarly how it's translated into English. It could mean a couple of things. It could mean when you play Grant to do 30 more damage, you're also able to discard 2 cards and put the Grant back into hand. That's kind of that was initially, to be honest, how I read it, and it's kind of the fairly not very exciting way of thinking about this card. I don't think that really improves it too much over Leon, because you still have to do this turn after turn, and we have things like Eldegoss and stuff. But what this also could be read that one, any time during your turn when you discard 2 cards from hand, say using an Ultra Ball, you can say, "Oh, I'll also pop the Grant back into my hand." So that's really interesting because it means that it doesn't have to be. You don't have to trigger this effect when you're playing the Grant. It can be at any time during the turn. So if you have like a dead hand, you can't find any supporter, but you have an Ultra Ball, you can get a supporter for the turn, for example. What it can also mean is you can kind of naturally give yourself -1 card because you discard 2 cards but put the Grant in hand. But then say you have a Quick Ball as well and you can Quick Ball away the Grant. You then technically just discarded an extra card for turn. Why would you want to do that? Well, with like a Bibarrel engine, that could be a very, very strong or very nice way of being able to get rid of more cards and be able to draw more with Bibarrel. We've seen that engine do very, very well. We've seen a lot of talk about things like Galarian Meowth paired with Bibarrel. And this but that has to be on your bench, and there's other stipulations. This is not as sort of impactful as Galarian Meowth, but this is theoretically always live. And because when cards go into the hand and back to the discard pile, they become private knowledge at a certain point, they essentially reset effects. So similar to Propagation Execute, you can reuse Propagation Execute over and over again, even if you only have one in your list, because it's considered a new card every time it hits the discard pile. So, what that means is, with the right sort of hand setups, you can essentially get rid of your whole hand with Grant, and then be able to draw it with the barrel. And drawing the right cards, again, if you have a couple of barrel on board, you can then get rid of a load more cards and draw more with the barrel. It's probably not as strong as some of the other draw engines we have, like Sinnoh and such, but it's definitely very, very interesting. And the biggest, or one big thing for me, is just being able to hand thin not on the board. Has some very, very interesting sort of applications, particularly to control decks, but also any sort of barrel engines in general. Obviously, this is very much dependent on how the card is translated. If it, excuse me, if it's translated that when you play Grant, you need to discard the 2 cards, it's obviously a lot worse. We already have Leon. There's not really much reason to play this over Leon, I don't think, because there's not many situations where you're going to have 2 turns to be able to play Grant. So I think while it's a strict upgrade on Leon and exactly fighting decks, I don't know how much of an upgrade it is. But if it turns out that you can kind of do this weird barrel -1 thing, with the right kind of hand, it could produce some pretty interesting combinations. I think it's, considering the set was only released, or the set was only leaked today, I mean, we've known about this card for a couple of days, but we only really realized this today, so I have no idea. I couldn't sit here and tell you what this opens up, but the concept that this open up, there could be very, very wild implications for this card, and people with huge brains in the game, like Sander and stuff, will look at this card and probably tear it wide open, which is really exciting to see, to be honest. It's a very, very bizarre card. It will very much depend on the English translation. I really hope it's translated the way that lets you do it any time during the turn, and with any cards during the turn, because that will really introduce a lot of creativity with the card, potentially. But yeah, a very, very interesting card, and something that they've never really done before, bar like Propagation, which I think, in my mind, is one of the most unique cards of all time. So yeah, really interesting. The first line of text is kind of irrelevant. The second line of text are potentially very impactful.
Yeah, I mean, there's only a handful of fighting Pokemon that are relevant, but yeah, you're looking at things like Rapid Strike Urshi, potentially. Single Strike Urshi, especially if you can like pull this back at any time to like one blow through something, could be like decent. But yeah, the second line of text, we need to get that sorted, because holy, it could open a lot of cans of worms if it's how we think it is. Next up we have Choi. Both players reveal their hands, and then you draw 3. So it's more interesting than like a Barry or whatever, but still not strong enough draw for any deck, really. Maybe a control deck, just because hand knowledge is more useful to you than your opponent, because basically your entire hand is just reactionary cards based on what they have in hand. So really that's about it. But it's only a draw 3, so it's not super powerful.
Finally, we have the Temple of Sinnoh. Each special energy attached to Pokemon in play provides colorless and has no other effect. So it's essentially Dusknoir's ability on a stadium. Dusknoir is used in some control decks, typically in combination with other stadiums. So I don't know whether this is a strict upgrade for those, but not having to play like a Zoroark engine with a 0-1 Dusknoir or a 101 Dusknoir or anything, being able to play a Temple of Sinnoh could potentially be something for the control decks. Typically, I don't think it's going to be too much stronger than some of the other stadiums we have in format. I think as a Mew player, I'm a little bit more scared of The
Path.
the path, yeah. Typically, path is, I think, gonna be more detrimental to you. And there's we have a massive stadium war, like we have massive stadium wars going on in the format already. The biggest thing that we actually noted with this card was the interaction with Fusion Energy and Inteleon that leads into the Hisuian Samurott that was in the Battle Legion set that we're getting. Hisuian Samurott, it does 220 damage for 2 energy if your opponent's active Pokemon already has damage counters on it, but typically getting damage counters onto Mews is quite hard because of the fusion energy, because that prevents things like Inteleon and Zigzagoon doing ping damage, as well as Hisuian Samurott's V-Star power as well. Temple of Sinnoh would turn that off, which means would turn the fusion energies off, which means they would then be accessible to these abilities, which would mean that then Samurott was able to uptrade on them very, very well. It's an incredibly efficient Pokemon before you even consider weakness. But then being able to uptrade on a Mew for very, very little cost, especially when you have Dark Patch and stuff to be able to stream attackers, is very powerful. So I think one of the biggest implications for this will be in that Samurott deck. It doesn't necessarily, it won't necessarily turn out to be the best stadium in that deck, but it's one that we pointed out that seems to be pretty impactful in terms of helping with the Mew matchup, because surprisingly without that it can be a little bit awkward here and there. We have a couple of ideas of how it maybe can be improved, but this seems to be one of the more interesting ones. I don't think there's too many other decks that are actually too fussed about this because of how many stadiums people are playing right now. But yeah, definitely want to keep in mind, it's one of these stadiums where if you're playing an all basic energy deck and there's not really much use for you playing things like Training Court and stuff, which seems like a very niche market, but maybe there is the market for that kind of stadium, then that's going to be where this kind of stadium goes, I think.
Yeah, it's strangely niche because everyone goes back to Crystal Beach, that was like a super playable card back in the day. But we just have such good search and cycle and tutoring that it feels like the Stadium War already like 3 and 4 counts in so many decks that it doesn't get the value that you'd like. So we'll be jumping through a ton of cards. We are going to be looking at GLC and Cube as well quickly, just like noting them as we go. So yeah, I'm happy to see a free retreat Yanma. That's great news. I'm actually really happy with that. And this Yanmega potentially is good enough for my cube because 120 for 2 is like a good amount. So that's a nice upgrade for me. I'll stop Jack at sort of interesting cards. So do you want to talk about Shaymin?
Yeah, so Shaymin has the Bright Gift attack for 1 colorless that says this attack can only be used on your first turn. If you go second, search deck for up to 3 cards and put them into your hand. Obviously not game breaking in standard, I don't think, but in some of these slower formats, it definitely could be a nice pickup in terms of just an early game setup card. Things like formats like GLC always like to have lots of good starters, and this is like a fantastic one. Admittedly, it's kind of a bit mediocre if you're going second because it kind of doesn't do anything. Sorry, if you're going first because it doesn't really do anything. But I think the upsides are good enough to potentially include it, just because that kind of search in a format like that can be really, really powerful in terms of sort of building momentum going forward into the game.
Yeah, very true. We are going to jump to Hisuian Lilligant V and V Star. So the regular V, 200 hit point grass type with a 2 retreat cost. It has Dance for no energy. You get to draw until you have 6 cards in hand. And Leaf Step for grass colorless, you do 130 damage. It's really nice seeing a 0 energy attack cost. It's obviously just a huge benefit whenever you can sort of weave this in. In the format, oftentimes it's better to just try and leave 1 prizes in the active position rather than just leave a 2 prizer out there. But what I do like is obviously it's a 0 energy attack cost and your Gardenia is attaching to the bench oftentimes. So you're probably just going to like leave that active and try and power up a bench Lilligant V anyway a lot of the time. So having like a no requirements to get this extra couple cards is never like a bad thing. 200 hit points on a grass type is actually like pretty reasonable, which is a shame. And we actually have a hit point buffer in the set as well, which could also be pretty helpful. So not a bad starting V. And then the V Star has 260, which is again like a reasonable amount, especially when we are incorporating some buffs later on. And it has the parallel spin attack for grass colorless. Again, you do 130 base, and if you return an energy attached to this Pokemon to your hand, you do an additional 100 230, very, very solid number. Like we said when we were talking about the Gardenia, grass typing is relevant to Darkrai and to Hisui and Samurott. And even without hitting for weakness, 230, good number for dealing with Vs. You can even knock out Genesect even with their minus 30 resist, so that's nice. You have the potential to be playing things like the Hawlucha, and you have the potential for Choice Belt as well, so you can do some damage modifying here and there, which is pretty cool to improve your numbers. So yeah, it seems reasonable, especially when you look at the V-Star power, allowing you to search your deck for 5 in any combination of Grass, Pokemon, and Energy, and put them straight into your hand. This is a really nice setup ability, actually, and makes me much more comfortable playing a supporter like Gardenia, which just doesn't do a lot for you in terms of cycle. This allows you to get your next Lilligant prepared, essentially. You can get some of these setup Pokemon ready for you, like that Kricketune that we'll talk about later. It can also get you Eldegoss V as well, which I think is a great thing to sort of bank in your hand for the following turn, to make sure that you have access to your next Gardenia to keep that attacking chain rolling. So yeah, I think super interesting card. Its typing is going to be the main reason why it sees any play. I still don't really see an easy way for it to beat things like Mew just out the gates, because you're not doing good damage and your hit points are fairly low to begin with. So this is going to be one of these cards that's sort of in that sort of typing covering mix. I do like its ability a lot, and it's really down to the power of Gardenia and what you can sort of pair this ability with, because you can go quite wild with your setup mons if you really want to, because this is just gives you such good free license to do so. So yeah, pretty interesting combo. Is there anything else to say on this, Jack?
I think so. It's one of these which just does sort of interesting numbers. It does once 260 with a belt, so whether you're playing this with Inteleon pings or that Hawlucha or whatever, it's kind of just on the cusp of enough damage, so we'll have to see whether it's built around... I think Inteleon, in my mind, is the easiest damage mod.
Sure.
But yeah, it seems like a really, really interesting... Again, another of these fairly efficient V-Stars. It's nothing super flashy, but it's just efficient on a 2-prizer, a lot of HP, a decent chunk of damage. Yeah, really, really cool.
All right. So we have the Cyndaquils. We'll see the Hisuian chap later. We have a fairly interesting Politoed that just does more damage based on Wagwell and Wrath being in play. How much is the maximum you can do here? It's
280.
280?
If you have one of each.
280 for the whole
Which is pretty
crew?
funny.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's going to be pretty inconsistent, but yeah, we've seen these kind of things never really come to fruition before, but 280 is a lot of damage, to be honest, so maybe you'll be able to try it out. We actually have really good recovery right now, so there is that, but yeah, it's a stage 2, so even doing 280 for 2 probably isn't enough, unfortunately.
The two little guys are both carrier-able, which is at least
Yeah.
something, and you have lots of bull search, but yeah, as soon as your opponent bosses the right target or whatever,
Yeah.
things just kind of crumble, right? You need to evolve 3 things and rebench a wag and stuff. Could be fun though, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Mantine has an Echoing Horn attack, but we have it in a trainer, so that's probably just going to be better. We have, as I scroll further down, we have Manectric, not too interesting. Do you want to talk about Luxray?
Yeah, I mean, first off, make sure you get that art up here
Oh,
because
yes.
this is incredible. I think some of the VR in this set is crazy good. This Oranguru,
The Machamp. I
there's another
love the
one, Machamp.
Machamp.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's some really good basic V Pokemon. Yeah, Luxray is a 210 HP basic V lightning Pokemon. First attack for 2 energy to colorless energy is Fang Snipe that does 30, and your opponent reveals their hand, discard a trainer you find there. This is pretty impactful when you pair it with something like a Roxanne. Obviously, doing damage. So typically, you're probably going to be playing this, for example, with a double turbo. So you're reducing your damage down to 10. Typically, these kind of attacks sometimes don't really want to be doing damage because they can be used as sort of locking attacks, and eventually the lock will be broken when your opponent eventually gets knocked out or whatever, right? So the damages are in a really weird spot where it's kind of not enough to really be an aggressive trying to take prizes kind of attack, but too much to necessarily be a very control heavy attack. But it's definitely very powerful. The fact that it stipulates trainer as well means that basically pretty much everything is like your opponent has to have a very good 2 cards or top deck to be able to get out of a Roxanne. So yeah, an interesting one. I don't really know whether it's good enough to make it into a controlling style deck. You obviously can attach an extra double turbo or whatever to really reduce this damage, but it feels like that's way too sort of extra to actually be something to go for, especially when they could just draw out of it. We do have I think it's Orbeetle that basically is pickaxe. So again, like with the way with the fact that it's discards rather than shuffles in or anything, it is sort of an eventual resource grind where you will run them out of resources. But it's going to take someone with a bit of a smarter brain than I think, to make this work. But definitely a pretty strong attack, and it feels like there might be something there. Radiating Pulse is not too strong, though, for 2 lightning and a colorless 120. You discard 2 energy from this, and your opponent's active Pokemon is now paralyzed. We've got Rope, we've got Switch, we've got all sorts of ways to retreat at the moment, so paralysis really isn't too strong. But yeah, a very interesting one. I'm not necessarily sure on the implications of it. The damage is it's a really weird number. 30 is like the weirdest number they could have put because it's kind of too much and kind of too little, which is quite funny. But yeah, I think we could see this see play here and there at some point during its tenure, just because discarding a trainer is a very strong effect, and naturally in a format with Roxanne, I'm pretty sure you could see that. You can see that combo a mile off being very, very detrimental.
Yeah, even just like Boss Galamine and start cherry picking nets and switches and stuff is really good. And just a quick thing on paralysis in general, not necessarily this card, but Roxanne does make paralysis like way stronger of a comeback mechanic, as we saw with Raichu alone and Raichu. But yeah, this won't be the card to do it. I'm pretty sure there's already like a 1-prize Zekrom that can do some paralysis stuff. We have a Regieleki, which actually is like a big upgrade to Morpeko. We've been talking about a few control cards here. The reason why this is an upgrade to Morpeko, other than its retreat cost, which could be a turn off, is that for 1 colorless, you can put an item from your discard pile into your hand, which is the exact same text as Morpeko, but this has 50 extra hit points, and because it's a lightning type Pokemon, you can speed lightning to it to draw off of it. So if you want this in your control deck, it's a possible engine whilst also recovering, crushing hammers in the early game, right, while you're trying to stabilize and buy time. Pretty scary card. So yeah, do you want to jump onto Typhlosion?
Yeah, so Typhlosion is the first Hisuian, 1-prize Hisuian Typhlosion we've seen. It's a stage 2 psychic type with 150 HP. Spectral Ball says during a turn you may discard a psychic energy from your hand. If you do, your opponent's active Pokemon is now burn and confused, so you can basically see this as a plus 20 and a bit of annoyance. Whilst I just said special conditions aren't particularly strong right now, being able to do this every turn is quite annoying, to be honest. And I can't think of too many situations where this is typically better than some of the other status conditioned Pokemon, but there are some benefits to statuses in general. I think just the fact it's on a stage 2 means the ability is way too weak. I don't really think there's too much synergy to discarding Psychic Energy right now either. Shadowbind is its attack that does 90 and your opponent can't retreat during your next turn, but again, we have lots of ways of movement right now, so all in all, a pretty interesting ability, but because it's on a stage 2, I just don't think it's strong enough. I don't think there's enough synergies out there.
Yeah, very happy to see it for a cube card, though. I am a big fan of this card. Yeah. We have a mobile not doing much. We have a really interesting Jirachi V, actually. It always seems to get interesting abilities. 180 hit points psychic type that has the ability Wish Bridge. When your basic Pokemon V is knocked out by damage from your opponent's attack, you may choose a basic energy from the knocked out Pokemon and move it to one of your other Pokemon. So it's like a EXP share ability, only for basic Vs, which is slightly awkward. But it's a great way of retaining energy without physically having EXP shares attached to your guys. So we already have EXP Share Shopping Center as like a mini package deal if you want to have some energy retention. But now it means you can just play 1 card in Jirachi and be able to maintain energy amongst your Pokemon that way. And it means that you can actually use cards like Cape of Toughness and Choice Belt instead, which are obviously like great damage mods and health buffs for like 2-prize V Pokemon. So maybe there's going to be some push towards, like early on in the previous format, we tried like an Entei Bird Box style deck or like a Suicune Bird Box. These are sort of hovering around that playability mark and maybe just a little bit under the bar for the most part. But maybe a card like this makes it good enough as an archetype, because even if this Jirachi is getting gusted for like a 2-prize KO, you've retained the energy just because your active Pokemon's not being KO'd. So maybe there's a way where these like 2-prize V decks just come out the gate fast enough and race hard enough with like bossing other decks for like 2-2-2 game plans. You know, we've seen Echoing Horn make it into Mew, it could make it into an aggressive 2-prize archetype, and this Jirachi could be like just a bench sitter that you need to make sure that you're seeing your way through the game. So interesting card there actually, and I like it for sure. We've got this, and we've got the new Switch card for the all basic deck. So they're trying to push it as a basic box archetype. Could be pretty interesting. So yeah, I'm a fan of this Jirachi. I think it's pretty cool. It could even combo nicely with like a Ditto V as well if you're trying to just use one type of Pokemon, and like your active Pokemon is the one that you're using, and it gets knocked out, you can Ditto it back into the active again, essentially, with like the energy returning. So super cool card actually, even though it is just a little fragile V Pokemon. But hopefully if you're racing with an aggressive V deck, you don't really care.
Yeah, I remember when we were looking at this, and I think you just mentioned like it's similar to a Raihan, but
Yeah.
it means that you can play a boss or a Marnie or a research and do more than just get a card.
Yeah.
I mean, you're tutoring the best card in your deck, but sometimes you need more than the best card. You need a combo or whatever. So yeah, it's a really interesting one. I don't think there's too much in between now and Machamp.
We've got a cubable Drifblim, Jack.
There's a cubable Drifblim, and Cresselia is pretty interesting as well. Moonlight Reversal, removing 2 damage from each of your Pokemon to one of your opponent's Pokemon. I always find those attack kind of interesting. A great Hisuian Arcanine art. I love this art. It's one of my favorites. Some amazing volcanoes in the background, and here's the Poliwrath as well. In case you're looking at that deck. But yeah, Machamp V is the next one to take a look at. As 220 HP as basic Pokemon. Revenge Buster does 50, and if your bench Pokemon has any damage counters, it does 50 more. Pretty mediocre damage overall, 2 for 100. It's fine, but like, not anything to really write home about. Especially when a lot of these dark types seem to be grass weak. Obviously we have Arceus, which is a big one to kind of hone in on in terms of weakness. But in general, it's pretty interesting to note that I don't think Fighting type is hitting as many weaknesses now. And then Seismic Toss 3 for 140. Again, it's an okay number hitting for weakness, but it's just not anything crazy. The VMAX, however, Machamp VMAX, has 330 HP, so pretty tanky to be honest. And has Revenge Buster for basically the same cost. Fighting Colors does 80 plus 140 instead of 50 plus 50. So that is a lot of damage. That's 220 for 2. We said how Hisuian Samurott does 220 for 2, and that's pretty efficient. And this honestly is some pretty good damage, to be honest. This, in combination with a Choice Belt and a couple of damage, sort of a couple of Inteleon pings or whatever here and there, is pushing you into 280, 300, maybe even VMAX range if you're playing like Lucha or whatever. So pretty efficient attack damage, to be honest. And then Max Charge does 240, and you can't use Max Charge during your next turn. So again, just some efficient damage if you just need more damage. The biggest issue is it's Psychic Weak, which means it's going to have a hard time into Mew. You can reach Mew numbers, but they're going to return KO you so easily, it's embarrassing. So yeah, it's pretty unfortunate. We do have Fighting Acceleration now, which is something worth noting, and obviously we have things like Grant and stuff, so you definitely can push numbers with this card, but I don't think the face of Fighting type will be Machamp. I think we probably have some other Fighting types that will not be giving up 3 prizes or not be weak to Psychic or whatever. This kind of is a very flashy one, but I don't think it's what Fighting is looking for right now.
Yeah, I mean, we've got Rapid Urshi, right? That's still the poster boy Fighting that you throw this guy up against and he comes out pretty badly.
Yeah, very badly.
A Pseudo can be a free retreater once it's damaged. I think that's something they're going for here. Like, they're trying to feed us the Machamp Bog Pseudo-Wudo combo. It's not a big deal, though. We have one of these fossils. Rampardos can do 240 for 2, which is pretty busted until you read that your opponent needs to have they need to have 4 or more cards in hand, basically. Otherwise, it does nothing. So, yeah, that's pretty poor, because it's pretty easy for your opponent to play down their hand size. Stop me if there's anything exciting you, Jack, as we go into the dark stuff. There's some great artwork to appreciate, like the Iirido here.
Yeah.
The Samurott is worth talking about. It's allowing you to discard a card from hand to draw 3. It's a stage 2. So a throwback to Swampert that we had in the Sun and Moon era. Dark Prison doing 60 plus 20 more times the amount of energy attached to all your Pokemon. So maybe there's a world where like a Turbo Darkrai plays this as a 1 prize attacker / engine Pokemon. Probably not strong enough though, because the hint is in the name that you want your Turbo Darkrai to be fast, and that's mostly going to mean lots of just quick ball search cards to get your patches rolling early. You want to have lots of Moltres powering themselves up, either the baby Moltres from hand putting 2 energy straight onto itself, or the Moltres V attaching even more from the discard pile. So there's probably not going to be much space for a Samurott in that sort of deck. So maybe there are archetypes that want to use this dump and draw option just as card draw, but you're competing against the likes of Sinnoh, you're competing against Bibarel. There's a lot of great like stage 1 abilities, and even obviously Inteleon is cherry picking cards, so it feels like it's getting like bullied out, unfortunately, because like its lower evolutions just aren't helpful enough for you by the looks of things. Do you want to take Thievul?
Yeah, next up is Thievul. Befuddle is the ability if your opponent has 2 or fewer prize cards remaining. Supported cards played from your opponent's hand have no effect on your benched Pokemon V. So actually it's a pretty strong effect. It protects your 2 prizes. So obviously if they have 2 or fewer prizes, you're going to assume they're probably going to be going for a 2 prizer, right? So it protects your 2 prizes, meaning you can leave a 1 prizer in the active to slow them down a turn, or a 3 prizer in the active to force more resources out of them to try and get them to win the game. Unfortunately, I just don't really know what this goes in. It's a pretty strong effect, but I don't really know what goes in this, and I think it's something that not necessarily can be played around, but there's once your opponent kind of has an idea that this might be coming, they can perhaps navigate their map slightly differently, and all of a sudden it doesn't really do much. We do have a couple of interesting Thievuls now, though. We have one that is essentially Marnie when you evolve it, so maybe like a thin Thievul package could be seen in some certain decks. I don't think it's particularly strong, but yeah, definitely an interesting ability. Can't really see a use for it or a deck that has space to be able to dedicate to a Thievul line, but yeah, definitely an interesting ability for sure.
Yeah, I actually really like it for forcing that, 4th attack to win the game, basically, where you feed them 2 prizes, then they have to knock out a 1 prize. I think it's actually pretty spicy. So I'm excited to try it out. But yeah, it is committing a lot of space, and with 100 hit points, it's annoying to search. So they've sort of just made it that little bit too annoying, I think, for the most part. We have artwork appreciation on what we can only assume is the largest Magnemite ever.
50-foot Magnemite.
And we have a Magnezone, which I'm so hype about for Cube. Because this ticks every box for my exact Cube, and Magnezone is one of my favorite lines in here. But let's talk about the ability. Once during a turn, you may look at the top 6 cards of your deck, choose any number of metal energy you find there, and attach those energy to your Pokemon in any way that you like, then shuffle the remaining cards back into your deck. So it's similar to, what was it? It was a Blastoise, right? That had this similar ability. Power School, that's the one. And so it's just for metal energy. So they're trying to feed this card in the same set as the Dialga, which we'll come on to momentarily. But it's a stage 2, and stage 2s are terrible. So we're probably just going to look to other means of acceleration, like Saucer, to keep metal going, because yeah, this is unreliable to get a candy into play, then more unreliableness just by looking at the top 6 cards. Things can just go wrong for you, and it needs to be fast to be able to work.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't. I mean, Blastoise was kind of seen here and there, but it was never particularly strong. But I don't even know like what the ratios of metal energy need to be in the deck to be able to like consistently be attaching. I guess 2, like minimum. So it's pretty ropey.
Yeah.
Registeel is like worth a very quick look just because there's a Regigigas deck, but it doesn't look particularly strong. But yeah, Registeel does 220 for 3, but 50 less for each colorless in the opponent's active Pokemon's retreat cost. Origin Dialga V. Now,
come on, Jack.
this is a tough one for us because we have a very soft spot for Dialga GX, Timeless GX. It was one of both of mine and Joe's favorite cards, and Origin Dialga V seems very, very sort of the remake of that. The basic has 220 HP, metal Pokemon, with the attack Metal Coat, which lets you attach 2 metal energy from your discard pile to this Pokemon. So a bit risky, to be honest, because you don't really want to be putting all of your sort of eggs in one basket and leaving all of your energy in the active, especially when 220 HP isn't really a particularly difficult number to hit. But regardless, on turns where it doesn't get KO'd, it's bonus acceleration, which is pretty good. And then Halt Time for 4 energy does 180. Obviously, that's pretty bad. But the V-Star has 280 HP, so on the upper end of V-Star HP. Has the Metal Blast attack. For 1 colorless, it does 40 damage, but then 40 more for every metal attached to this Pokemon. So essentially, say it's 3 energy, it's doing 160 for 3. Again, not great numbers, but because it's scalable, there's a little bit of sort of bonus points to that. But the big thing is the Chronos Star V-Star power. For 4 metal and a colorless, you do 220 damage, and you take another turn after this one. How exciting. Taking another turn is honestly one of my favorite effects. It's never really been good because they really have to limit how good, or like the stipulations for these kind of effects, because when you take another turn into perspective, you essentially at least draw 1 more card. So this card essentially says 220 damage, draw a card, plus assuming you're taking 2 prizes, it's the right number to be able to KO a V Pokemon. So you're drawing 3 cards, you get to attach an extra energy, you get to play an extra supporter card. You get to then sort of have your once per turn effects go again. So, any kind of Inteleon pings or whatever, any kind of evolutions, you get to do those again. So this attack, that's essentially what this attack is saying, which is why they have to limit how good it is by attaching a boatload of energy into the attack cost, right? Which is a real shame because it's a brilliant attack effect. I've taken Dialga to a regionals before and done absolutely trash, but had so much fun playing it. And I'm going to play this again because it seems like a whole lot of fun. Unfortunately, I'm coming to terms with the fact that it's probably just not good enough. I think realistically you have to pair this with things like Zacian and Bronzong to be able to get to the Chronos Star. I think the games you'll win are the games where you really, really do well in the early turns and you're able to Chronos Star early to be able to try and stop your opponent setting up particularly well. 220 being able to KO one of their attackers, and then an extra turn of finding sources, this, that, and the other to try and KO their big attacker or whatever with Metal Blast. I think they're the games realistically that you're going to be able to steal with Chronos Star. I think in the mid game it could be a pretty interesting one, being able to just I think that kind of typical setup could be pretty good. I can see this card taking 4 prizes realistically in a lot of scenarios. The difficulty is building a board that doesn't have like that. It basically always needs 2 Bronzong, right? You also need a lot of energy around the board, but never concentrated on one target. So you always need to have you always need to be able to get this Chrono Star almost out of nowhere, and then on top of that, you need to be able to take the first 2 prizes, because that's the difficulty in my mind. It's actually taking the first 2 prizes to be able to get to this point where you can kind of checkmate your opponent with the V-Star into Metal Blast. All of that being said, it sounds like so much fun, and I'm going to play the hell out of this card. This sounds like great fun. I don't think it's going to be breaking top tier, but I think it's one of the best. Well, it feels definitely better than the GX. It's probably not better than Yoga Loop in terms of taking 2 prizes, considering that's won a regional, and realistically, I can't see this winning regionals. But I'm going to play this card to death, and I'm going to have so much fun doing it. So yeah, I'm really excited to see this card.
Yeah, it's one for the dreamers out there. It's one of those things where, like, how many times have we flogged the dead horse of, like, we've had Corviknight, we've had, like, Aegislash, we've had, like, all these metal VMAXs, they've all just flunked whenever we've been like, Bronzong will fix it, and it just, like, never does. And now this is a 5 energy dude, like, oh no. But yeah, 2 turns will tempt us, that's for sure.
2 turns is exciting.
Speaking of an absolutely bog deck, this is the deck that wants to use the new Bog Stadium. Bishop does 30 plus 30 more for each damage counter on your benched Pawniard. And because Bishop is a stage 1, you can use Zoroark here. So you can have a Bishop in play whilst having all 4 Pawniards in play at the same time as well. So you can, if you've been able to bog, you can get 80 damage, right, onto each of your Pawniards pre like any other setup. You just need to bog, bench 4 Pawniards, and that's already like a really good chunk of damage, right? We're doing 270 for 1. That seems very strong because you can push that even further. You can damage your Pawniards further as well. You can do things like attack with Donphan, which does 20 to your own board as well. So you can try and put your Pawniards all down to like 20 hit points remaining, something like that. And then you're one-shotting stuff with Revenge Slash. So there's going to be some spicy boards with this card for sure. The Gyarados deck had like a really good engine to fall back on, so that's scary. And I believe it had tutoring for its stadium. At the very least, it was via teammates, but maybe some other things as well, like trainer's mail and stuff like that. So the lack of stadium search is what scares me about this, because you're not really allowed to put stuff into play until you've hit those stadium cards. So that scares me somewhat, and it's definitely like an awkward to sequence deck. But if you play this like alongside, like I said, Donphan or some other attackers that you can just sort of like shove out there, maybe this is just like a late game sweep is just like a crazy card. So I'm interested in trying it out. Definitely because I already love Zoroark. It's like a stage 1. Regardless, I certainly want to try it. Bog is just like an interesting card in general, so trying to make that throwback to Gyarados is definitely going to be cool. And obviously, 60 hit points on Pawniard is way better than the vulnerable little Magikarps that all had 10 hit points remaining on the board and meant that it just had auto losses here and there. I think this deck will have far fewer just like insta-lose games, so that's also something nice. So tricky to set up, but the dream is there, and you certainly have the damage output behind you.
Yeah.
Do you want to touch on Eevee?
Yeah, I mean, Eevee's unfortunate. I read Eevee and I was super excited. It has the sympathetic evolution ability. When during a turn, you may play a card to evolve. When you play a card to evolve one of your other Eevee, you may search your deck for a card that evolves from this Pokemon and play it on this Pokemon to evolve it. Standard, this is going to see not much play. There's not many good evolutions right now. Typically, the good ones are teched as 1/1 lines or that kind of thing. In Cube, though, this seems pretty cool. I don't think we have some insanely good EVs, so this isn't. I don't think this is one of the best ones, but I think it's better than some of the sort of mediocre ones, especially in people that like to build sort of stage 1 rush decks or that kind of thing. There's some really interesting evolutions that always end up in cubes. So yeah, cube wise, I think it's a really really cool one.
Yeah, I adore it for Cube.
And great art as well. Look at that art.
Oh yeah, also just phenomenal. So we have the meme Gigas, which has Ancient Wisdom. It's a 150 hit point basic, I should say. But yes, this ability says that if you have Regirock, Registeel, Regice, Regieleki, and Regidrago in play, you can search your discard pile for up to 3 energy and attach them to one of your Pokemon. So I guess what they're trying to make us do is either like we're hitting for weakness on the variety package of Regis that we have, or you're just hoping that like they're somewhat annoying attacks from like the Regice or decent enough damage from maybe the old Regidrogo perhaps as like attacking threats, and then just also having this Gigas to use Giganto Break for 5 colorless. You do 150, and if your opponent's Pokemon is a VMAX 150 more. Trying to do all this with basically no draw engine Pokemon because you've got nothing but Regis in play. Drago does have a minor bit of draw potential that we'll look at later, but in general, doing this whilst filling your board with these idiots basically is going to be a problem for you. And these attacks, although they could be good when you're hitting ×2 for a couple weaknesses, isn't going to be tempting enough, unfortunately.
Yeah. A couple of great arts in Rufflet and Hisuian Bravery, but nothing too impactful. Squib and Greedent. Greedent has an interesting attack effect. Discard your hand. If you discarded 5 cards, you do more damage. That's pretty cool. I don't think we've seen anything like that before, but leaving yourself with no hand seems quite bad, especially when you're only doing 210 damage, which is like 210's a lot of damage, but it's not good enough in terms of being able to deal with things like Arceus and stuff.
Yeah.
So the final card of Time Gazer is Weird V, which is one that I think I've seen a lot of talk about this card, and I'm not sure why personally. It has the ability Opening Road, which is a great ability. Once during a turn, when this Pokemon moves from your bench to become your active Pokemon, move any number of energy from your other Pokemon to it. So you can essentially bust in and get into Psyshield Bash very quickly, which does 40 damage times the number of energy attached to this Pokemon. You can see the obvious synergy there. You bust in at the end of the game, you pick all your energy up, shove it onto this Weirder, and KO something. The problem is, I don't really see what deck this goes in. You want this in kind of a deck that floods the board with energy. Typically, there's none of those, particularly right now, outside of like Arceus over a couple of turns, but you only really have energy on the board if nothing's being knocked out, and if nothing's being knocked out, you're probably in a good position anyway, so you don't really need this Weird Deer. The other decks that kind of like it are, or the other sort of flooding the board type of deck, is going to be something like a Turbo Dark, which Turbo Dark might not even be the best Dark type deck, so we don't even know that it's going to be the one like a good deck to play per se. But even if it is, the Darkrai does, I think it's 30 plus 30 for each Dark Energy on the board. Admittedly, that's a slower or smaller multiplier than Psychic Bash, but you have Dark Patch, you have way more HP, you have lots of ways of being able to boost your damage up. I could see Weirder being like a random late game attacker, but again, if you're managing to maintain enough energy on board for Weirder to be good, it feels like you're in a good position anyway. So whilst I get the obvious synergy between the attack and the ability, and to be honest, I think the ability is very, very strong. Because you're a colorless type, you have to be doing raw damage, and I just can't see a deck that is going to set this up to be doing a good amount of raw damage, which is a shame. It's a card with great attributes, but I just can't really see it working in many decks at all, to be honest.
Yeah, it's one of those things where there's so many throwbacks to successful cards, but right now it doesn't seem like there's much of a home. So let's jump down to Space Juggler, and we'll start with another V Pokemon this time, Beedrill V. It's a 210 hit point grass type, so already the alarm bells ring for the Gardenia. Its first attack is Twin Needle 40x for how many heads you can flip on 2 coin flips. And then you have Grass Colorless for Swarming Sting. You do 50 times the amount of Beedrill V you have in play to one of your opponent's Pokemon. So pretty cool. You don't need to play Boss's Orders in the deck, basically, because you're just going to be you're going to be stinging wherever you want, unless, of course, you have to come up against a Manaphy, which would be a shame. But yeah, 210 hit points. You can try and buff this with Capes. 200 damage, not great, because you're not really knocking out anything. You can do it to the active and like belt up, I guess, potentially. So you probably need some damage mods if you actually want to do anything like relevant with this card. The sniping effect is obviously very strong, and maybe you can do some sneaky like Echoing Horn plays where you really punish early like Crobat or early Eldegoss and take those prizes. It's the same damage that we saw from that like one prize stage 2 Vikavolt. And we saw that that was able to put some work in, but normally that was just because you had so many more turns because you were a one prize deck that you slowly got over the line. So I don't really see much hope here for the Beedrill, especially because even with the Gardenia, you need to be reloading a ton of energy as well, and your board is full of these bees, so you can't play many like engine Pokemon to get you going in the first place. So probably a bit too awkward there.
Yeah, I think so. I'll quickly touch on Voltorb and Electrode. Voltorb has a pretty cool attack going second. You choose 2 of your bench Pokemon and grab a basic energy from your deck. So again, these feel like very QB cards. And Electrode attacks for no energy. It can do 50 or draw 3 cards. So yeah, pretty cool stuff there. Kricketune is a more interesting one. It has the overflowing melody ability, which we touched on earlier on. HP of each grass Pokemon, excluding any Kricketune, is increased by 40. So this pushes... basically, the big one in my mind is essentially Hisui and Lilligant. Pushes this all the way to 300 HP, which is pretty strong. I think in that deck, you're naturally going to play something like a Shaymin, maybe a thin Shaymin line or something in there as well. So you kind of have that sort of tankingness to be able to survive a few more turns and really try and out-resource the opponent. I think it's a really nice way. This plus... the Big Charm pushes Lilligant into 330 HP, which for 2 prizes is a lot to get through, especially when you probably have to do that twice. And no one really wants to be like targeting down the Kricketune to get rid of that because it's just prize inefficient in terms of your race a lot of the time. So yeah, a pretty simple 1-1 line that I can definitely see going into the deck just to force extra resources out of the opponent.
Yeah, seems super annoying to deal with. We have a stage 2 Orbeetle, usually finds itself with some interesting cards. This one is no different. Has the ability Jamming Attach. Once in your turn, you may, or when you play this from your hand to evolve, you may attach up to 3 energy from your opponent's discard pile to their Pokemon in any way that you like. So super weird ability. It's like in air quotes helping the opponent by giving them energy. But the whole idea is you're putting them onto stuff to either buff your own damage output because you're doing 30 plus 50 for each energy attached to your opponent's active. So like in that sort of mid game scenario when you've already taken some KOs, you can evolve up jamming attach, essentially just force an extra 150 damage onto the opponent's active so you can try and do like a big amount with mystery wave. Like you can see how like maybe against an Arceus player or something, they've already got 3 energy attached to them. They've suffered a knockout previously and there's energy in the discard pile floating around. You can just like shove that onto them and mystery wave them straight away. But first of all, this is stage 2, which is terrible. It doesn't work early game because your opponent typically doesn't have many energy in the discard pile. You can sometimes Grinch like Melanie. You can Grinch like Clara plays, I guess, which is kind of funny. And you can even just throw these like resources that they can't recover onto random like Crobats or Luminions or something where it's not helpful to them. But yeah, this is all super slow, and you're a stage 2 in the first place, so I really don't see this seeing much play at all. It's like super glamorous for an effect that isn't even that interactive. It's really weird. It's like you try and just shove energy on to then just take it all off again by knocking out their active. That's kind of the gimmick that it's going for here, but it only really works in the late game.
Yeah. Great art on Rapidash, and Joe would be angry with me if I didn't mention all basics, no bricks. It's one of the best cards in the set for that. So yeah,
Oh
if
yes.
you're building that kind of cube, definitely try it out. Heatran V and VMAX are the next one. Pretty underwhelming, to be honest. Heatran V has 220 and does 30 plus burn for 2 energy, so essentially 50, but that's not great at all. Lava Fall does 90, and if you have a stadium card in play, 90 more, so 180 for 3. Again, we have more efficient attacks on things like Entei. The VMAX has 330, so again, as with Machamp, pretty strong, to be honest, in terms of tank ability, and the Lava Enhancement ability. So once during a turn, if you're a stadium card in play, you may heal 50 damage from this Pokemon. So you can kind of see they're going for like a big tanky kind of build. Offsets the damage you put on for the not giant hearth, magma basin.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the synergy they're going for there, but I don't think it's particularly strong. 330 is a lot of HP, especially when you're healing each turn. But we've seen like similar effects in things like Gardevoir VMAX. That's just not very good. And Max Heat does 180 plus burns. That's 200, which again is just not efficient when it comes to trying to really like produce a good deck.
Yeah, and we're excited about water stuff in this set, which is also bad. Bad news for him. We've got an interesting Golduck, which can discard both active Pokemon. Bit of a troll though, and it's expensive to get it done. But for some reason, I love this hyper-realistic artwork on the Golduck. Really, really crazy. That's awesome.
Yeah.
The Regice, one of these annoying Pokemon that can stop the defending V from attacking, but not super interesting. Oh, go on then, Jack. I'll let you talk about Palkia.
Oh boy, okay, so I love Dialga, but I think I love Palkia even more. Palkia is a 220 HP water type that has the Domain Ruler as the first attack for a Water Energy search deck for a stadium. Relatively underwhelming, not the biggest deal. Hydro Break does 200 for 3 in. This opponent can't attack. This Pokemon can't attack during your next turn. Again, nothing to write home about. At least it's like an efficient number of damage, but it's not really going to be doing. It's not really great in comparison with Suicune. What is good in comparison with Suicune is the V Star, 280 HP. With the Spatial Swell attack for 2 water energy, does 60 plus 20 for each base Pokemon. So it's Suicune's attack with a plus 40 base damage. Turns out that plus 40 is huge in a V Star meta because it means Choice Belt means you push into you very easily push into V Star range a lot of the time, and you can push into VMAX range without the use of Ludicolo. Obviously, you can't use Ludicolo with this because it's an evolution Pokemon, but with things like pings plus the extra base damage, it really means that it's definitely within range. There's not many decks right now that don't naturally fill their bench finding extra attackers or playing Inteleon engines or more Genesects, all that, this, that, and the other. So naturally, Spatial Swell is going to be doing a lot of damage. We've seen Suicune come second at regionals already this season, and we've still got another like 5 or 6 regionals where I realistically think Suicune could do well in the hands of a good player at any of those. And this is almost a strict upgrade. The only downgrade, quote unquote, is you can't really use Capture Energy with this. But I think that's pretty much fine because you don't need to be playing things like Lotabs and stuff to be able to fill your board. You can just get this off the back of, or you just have access to. You just need the like Sobbles and stuff. I still think you're going to want to be pairing this with the Inteleon engine, but I don't think that's a bad thing. Inteleon is great, obviously, and again, it's really going to smooth out your damage in terms of spatial swell. The plus 40 damage also means your opponents can't really play around your bench too much. With your full bench, you're doing 160, including an Inteleon, that's 180, including a Choice Belt, that's 210, and that's assuming they have no benched Pokemon, which means if they have anything less than 210, they're getting knocked out. If they have a bench Pokemon, they're doing 230, and that knocks out any basic V Pokemon right now. So the numbers, just the plus 40 is so good for Suicune's numbers. You also have an extra 70 HP on top of this. We've already seen capes being run on Suicune. This has an inbuilt cape plus gets to play a Choice Belt, which is really good. Or it can even play a Big Charm and push into 310, which is just incredibly difficult to deal with. I even think the Lightning Weakness is way better in comparison to things like Jolteon because Jolteon could really efficiently take down a Suicune and a Sobble or an Inteleon or a Drizzile at the same time. Whereas, yes, it still trades into you fairly well, but you can actually race them a lot better and you tank a hit a bit more, which is cool. And that's before even talking about the ability as well. So the V-Star Power Star Portal says once during your turn you may use this. Attach up to 3 Water Energy from your discard pile to your Water Pokemon in any way you like. So imagine Suicune that doesn't have to play Ludicolo, so it gets to play a more consistent engine. You're not trying to play a second stage 2. That has an extra amount of damage that also doesn't have to limit itself to playing Melanie, which is naturally a pretty weak supporter in terms of draw engine. That's what Palkia is. It means that you still probably would play Melanies here and there for the early turns or Raihans, that kind of thing. Excuse me, just to set up the first Palkia perhaps. But it basically means in the mid game you can forget all about Melanie, you can forget all about Raihan. You can pair Suicune with Marnies, with bosses, with researchers, with all of this crazy stuff that Suicune has basically never really been able to do because it needs to chain Melanie or Raihan every turn. You can still go down the one prize route because you're still playing this one prize engine in Inteleon, which means in all of these 2 prize matchups, you're able to offset the prize trade. I think you can even still play Suicunes to be sort of early game tempo attackers whilst you're setting up Palkia. If you wanted to try and build up Palkias in the back. You compare this with things like, you compare this with Ice Rider. The more I think about Ice Rider, it's kind of weird because I think Ice Rider is a very good deck, but in its own right. But you can even play like a thin Ice Rider in this. Ice Rider naturally gets a bit better with the release of Holucha anyway, so that's really good. You have things like Greninja to help discard your water energies early to activate Star Portal earlier, as well as activate any like thin one-of Melanies or Raihans that you might be playing. Kind of how Arceus does at the moment. So yeah, there's nothing I don't like about this card. I think it's basically Suicune on steroids. It's a shame to have this compared to Dialga, which I really want to play, but I've always been a big Palkia fan, and I'm really excited to try this card out. I love Suicune Ludicolo. I'm not a particularly good Suicune Ludicolo player. I think it definitely lends itself to people who are experienced with the deck, but I think I'm going to be learning a bit more about the deck and a bit more about the kind of things that the deck can do, because I get to play an extra 70 HP plus 40 damage come May, and that sounds incredible. It sounds like a serious competitor in the metagame, I think.
Yep, I love it too. Let's move swiftly past this Avalugg. Let's move swiftly past the great artwork of Togepi. Togekiss is healing 90 when it comes into play, but that's just not enough heal. We even have... Just try Ice Pops, I don't know, do something else with your space. You have Mesprit taking away weakness. If you have Uxie Azelf in play, these aren't worth the spaces either.
Unless count as the sunglasses.
Yeah, I was going to say, unless Sunglasses gets top tier. They kept it in check straight away. We've got great artwork from Kamiya on Mally, everyone's favourite Pokemon.
Mally doing the wave.
We have a thick Hariyama as well. This is just artwork appreciation at this point. The Regirock can hit 140, so actually relevant, because you can knock out Arceus in that Regi deck, I guess. We have more great artwork from the Gastros. We have a cubable Carbink. You love to see that. Searching for 2 items and putting them straight into the hand. Not bad. Have Hisuian Decidueye. It's a stage 2 that has 160 hit points, weak to Psychic. Cutting Talon for no energy at all does 30x the number of damage counters on your opponent's active. Requires a lot of setup, really. Kind of slow as well. It's not bad to just finish things off and maybe attach elsewhere. Otherwise, not too interesting. Do you want to talk about Cleaver, Jack?
Oh yeah, Cleavor's another interesting one. The basic 210 HP Cleavor V has cut for 1 fighting energy that does 40, and Battle Axe Slash for 3 energy that does 150. Discard energy from this Pokemon and then from the opponent's active Pokemon. It's fine. It's nothing great. The V Star is pretty interesting though. In terms of efficiency, it has Break Axe. It has 270 HP, sorry, and then Break Axe is its main attack for 120 damage and a 60 damage snipe to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon V. So that kind of sets up nice numbers, nice-ish numbers. I think Into Arceus is actually a pretty strong attacker, to be honest. But unfortunately, this is one of these attackers where it's very flashy, and I think it's actually great at dealing with one of the pillars of the metagame. But against something like a Mew, I just can't ever see how this kind of deck really can function. So that's unfortunate. I think it's interesting. There's a lot to like about this card in like an Arceus exclusive meta, because I think it's incredibly efficient. Arceus struggles to deal with it, and even with a choice belt, they have to have a big charm to just survive a 2 energy attack, and you're then setting up the second Arceus on the bench so that they can't really ever last the next one without healing it off or whatever. Obviously, Dunsparce is a card, but yeah, it's a really interesting card, but I just don't think it really fits in a world where the format isn't just Arceus, which is a shame because I think it's pretty cool. Rampaging Star is its V-Star power, does 30 for each Pokemon in your discard pile. So this is actually this would take one big KO, probably, towards the late game after you've seen a few Pokemon get discarded. So you have you're not completely capped at 120 damage, and into things that are weak to Cleavor, it's pretty strong. But the problem is there's enough in the format right now that Cleavor, even doing 180 for 2 across two targets, is not efficient enough, or is not doing enough to be able to make it through. Like in comparison to something like a Jolteon, this is kind of limiting because you can't target things like Sobbles and stuff. And I think that you're doing less damage, and I think the damage split is way worse anyway. So in comparison to Jolteon, it's kind of cool for exactly the weakness on Arceus, but overall underwhelming, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. We have a Hisuian Sneasler, which is going straight into my All Basics No Bricks cube, reducing the retreat cost of your active Pokemon by 2 as long as the Sneasler is on your bench. Happy to see that, otherwise useless. We have, because we just have so many good, we have Switch Rope, Balloon, all better. Then we have the Sneasler V. It's 190 hit points, Dark type, free retreater. For any people still playing Eternatus, you got your free retreater back. You can poison for no energy, and you do 80x the amount of special conditions on your opponent's active. Still not relevant. Does less damage than like Salazzle, so not a big deal there. We have a Clay Shieldon. Love to see it. We have a Bastiodon tanking some V Pokemon, but not worth getting a fossil into play. My favorite artwork of the set, Bronzong, genius. This is just absolute. This is a work of art on its own. Like, imagine this is just like a mural in like, I don't know. I just see this as like a graffiti type thing on a wall somewhere.
100%. Yeah. It's bright, it's colourful, but it's also like in a weird cartoony way. It's like hyper realistic. It's kind of like Golduck, but in a different sort of sense of hyper realism. You can see like a lot of detail on it. It's really cool. I like it.
Yeah, it brings back the heat proof ability, but we feel like right now there's not any pure fire deck, so we don't think it has much usage there. The Regidrago can draw until you have 4 in hand, so it's like an Oranguru instructing, but it has to be active to draw up to 4. Or I guess it's more similar to Kricketune V, I guess, but you don't have that backup of being able to draw up to 3 when it's not active, which is awkward, but I guess it's the little crumb of consistency that you get if you're playing the quad Regi or the 6 Regi deck.
Yeah.
We've got some great tongue action going on from the Lickies. We've got the Eevee in both sets. We've got an Ursaluna not doing much. And do you want to close us out with Guru
I know.
v Jack?
I'll leave this one to you. I'll leave this one to you.
I'll tell you what. I'm basically the artwork of this Guru V when I saw what this card actually does. It's a 2/10 hit points, 2-prizer that has the ability. Once you return, if this is in the active, you can search your deck for 2 tools, reveal them, and put them into your hand. Like, this just really isn't good. Searching out tools shouldn't be like a big issue, and you have to get this guy in the active just to do it. Not fantastic, especially because one of those tools is almost immediately just going to be an air balloon that you put straight onto him. So it's just search for 1 tool, basically. It's really not helpful. And then Psychic does, for 3 colors, 30 plus 50 more for each energy attached to your opponent's active. Yeah, I mean, it can do some work against, like, Arceus and stuff and, like, set up 2 shots, but who really cares? You're not hitting anything for weakness. You have to power him up somehow. He's just not worth putting into play, unfortunately, and this one goes down as an L for Guru, which is sad for all Guru fans out there. And also the thing that won't ever let you sleep at night ever again is just look at the size of his hands.
And again, the realism on the hands.
Yeah, that really is scary. And
I need to calc Oranguru cards because we might finally have less good ones than bad ones now.
No.
For a while, it was like the best Pokemon of all time, just because like 60% of its cards had seen incredible success. So then, I think the V has screwed it over.
Yeah, true. And then we're winding down with a Kamala, which I think is cubable. If it's knocked out when it's asleep, your opponent doesn't take a prize card, and it does 60 for 2 and sends itself to sleep. So I think that would be annoying to face in Cube. But otherwise, some really interesting stuff today. I think definitely the trekking boots, or whatever they're called, are going to be worth sort of monitoring. The Grant card we need some clarification on. And obviously you've gushed about Palkia. You're a massive fan of that archetype. What else are we super excited about in the set to really attack with? I'm still like massively into the Samurott that we've already seen. I definitely want to try out some Bog decks as well. Want to see how that Bishop functions and the best way to get it rolling. Whether or not it needs a backup attacker, or we just try go all in on the Bog and play random like Rotom Phone trekking.
Carrier, but it's not carrierable, unfortunately. Rescue carrierable, unfortunately.
The Bishop?
Money, so,
yeah.
That's a shame.
And Lilligant seems like okay. Lilligant's definitely going to be one of these cards that like you have in the binder. It's like it picks its moments in tournaments just because there's a tipping point of people playing like Samurott and Darkrai versus other things.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm cautiously optimistic about Gardenia. It feels like they have welded in, which is good.
Yeah.
And it's with a type that isn't going to be anywhere near as oppressive. Not that I felt Welder was like oppressive, but like it was never bad. Whereas I feel that there'll be metas where Gardenia isn't bad, but the decks it's in are bad.
Yeah.
Or not right. Whereas Welder was like basically relevant from the day it was printed all the way until the day it rotated. So
yeah,
it feels like they've touched the card quite well and made it a little bit fairer, which is cool.
Nice one. Well, we've rambled on for a long time as usual, so let's get on out of here. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hope you did enjoy. That was our sort of first impressions discussion. We're probably going to do the set review, I guess, like 3 weeks' time, something like that. I guess it's actually going to be post EUIC is our timeline for it.
In my mind, we'll hopefully be able to have like a week or so of games, a week or so of trying some stuff out, and then early May we'll have set review and we'll start testing both current standard for all of the relevant tournaments that still remain, as well as bringing you some new format content ready for sort of prepping for a couple of the regionals that are in new format before NISC. So yeah.
Awesome. Right, let's get on out of here and we'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.